Boatworks today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexseal Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much.
So welcome back to Shop, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you had a fantastic Thanksgiving and ate way too much, as you should. So today I want to talk about fairing compound, specifically polyester-based fairing compound. Now, if you're looking at a project, inevitably you're going to find yourself digging around online and you're going to land on some of these boating forums. And whenever you're asking questions as far as what materials you should be using for your project, overwhelmingly there is a camp of people that say that anytime you're doing any repair work or modification on your boat, you have to be using epoxy-based materials. And I'm sorry, that's just not true. Yes, there are situations where epoxy-based materials are the better choice, but there are also situations where polyester-based materials are the better choice. And over the years, I've worked with hundreds of people, consulting with them on their particular projects. And inevitably, when you get towards the finishing stages of whatever it is they're doing, a very common reoccurring question that comes up is, well, which fairing compound should I be using? Should it be epoxy-based or should it be polyester-based? And to that, my answer has always been the same. It's, well, it depends. It depends on where you're doing this work. Is it above or below the water line? What kind of temperatures are you going to be working in? And probably most importantly, how are you intending to finish the repair? Are you going to be finishing with paint or are you going to be finishing with gel coat? So now, before we get into this, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page and have an understanding as far as what fairing compound is and more specifically, what it is not. Fairing compound is a cosmetic-only coating. It has zero structural strength. So for example, you've done some glass layup, the surface is a little bit low, or you have some, pinholes, whatever, after doing some sanding. Perfect. You have a scratch or a ding in the surface of your hull. Perfect. You have some stress cracks. That's a hard no. It's not going to last, and you're going to end up having to come back and touch it up over and over and over, which every time you have to do a redo, the repair area is going to be slightly larger and larger, and which also means that most likely that repair is going to become more and more noticeable. So you want to approach these types of things with like a one and done type attitude, and using the right material in the right application is going to make or break your project. Now, when you're working with polyester material, there can be some challenges if there isn't an understanding of what that material requires or what it needs to properly do its thing. Some of these considerations are going to be, what kind of temperatures are you going to be working in? Polyester-based material, whether it's fairing compound or you're wetting out fiberglass, polyester requires an absolute bare minimum of 60 degrees Fahrenheit, preferably warmer. The sweet spot tends to be around 70, 75 degrees. Also, where's the work getting done? Is it above or below the waterline? Now, if it's below the waterline, there are workarounds where polyester-based materials can be used, but ideally below the waterline, something epoxy-based is going to be the better choice. Now, above the waterline, that's a completely different situation. And for that, I would say, for me, the deciding factor would be, as I mentioned, what are you going to be finishing the repair with? Is it going to be with gel coat or is it going to be with paint? Now, technically, polyester-based fairing compound can be used or top coated with both gel coat or paint. However, this is one of those things, again, where the devil is in the details. One of the characteristics of polyester material is that it shrinks a lot more than epoxy-based materials, and not just initially over the first day or even couple days. We're talking weeks, if not several weeks. The curing process for a lot of this material extends a lot longer than what you may actually think, right? So as a hypothetical situation here, let's just say we're going to be finishing off we're painting, we're doing a touch up on our hull and we're going to be finishing it with paint, right? So you go through, you do your glass work, whatever kind of prep or repair was required, and now you've gone through and you've done your fairing compound using polyester material. You go through, you sand it, it looks beautiful, you prime it, you paint it, it looks absolutely fantastic for about a week or two. What happens is that during that time, that while the surface was perfect when you primed and painted initially, that polyester fairing has continued to cure and specifically shrink. So what was absolutely flawless initially, now because that material has shrunk, now you're starting to see some little shadows or halos or print through of the fairing compound through your paint. And it's not something you're going to see right away. Again, like I said, this is something that takes weeks, for it to kind of crop or raise its head. Now, take that compared to if you're going to be doing your fairing with an epoxy-based material. Epoxy-based really doesn't shrink hardly at all. And I did some demos here last night to kind of help illustrate this. So for this example, I mixed up 4 ounces of polyester-based fairing, and I catalyzed this at 2%, which means for 4 ounces of the material, I added 2.5 cc's of MEK or methyl ethyl ketone peroxide. And the reason I'm doing this is for all of the samples I'm going to be doing here, I want to be able to pull from the same batch, catalyzed at the same percentage. Now also, in order to help maintain consistency from sample to sample, as you can see, when I'm spraying this material out, I've got 2 mixing sticks along the sides. And what this is going to do is the spreader is going to be able to ride on top of these stir sticks, which means I'm going to be able to get an even and consistent film thickness across each of these samples. So I'm going to lay this material up and let it sit overnight. Now, in addition to this, I also mixed up 2 small samples of some epoxy-based fairing compound, specifically using the Total Fair. And again, same process was followed. I used the stir sticks along the sides to maintain a same or a similar consistency or thickness between the epoxy as well as the polyester-based materials. I want to try and do as much of a like-for-like comparison as I can. And one overnight cook later, this is what we got. So this top row, this is all polyester-based fairing material, and then down here we've got the epoxy-based fairing material. Now, as you can see across this top row, there's a bit of a common theme going on. They got a little case of the curls, and the reason that this is happening is because, well, the material has started to shrink. Taken the edges, and literally it's just pulled this paper right up, as opposed to the epoxy-based fairing stuff. This is still flat as a pancake. So when it comes to finishing your project with paint, this is a good example why doing your fairing compound with an epoxy-based material is going to be the better choice. Again, can you do it with polyester material? Yes. Is it the better choice between the two? In my opinion, not at all. Now, if you're going to be finishing with gel coat, now this is a very different animal here. Gel coat, again, is another polyester-based material. So and it's also in a much thicker film. So paint, for example, the film thickness is literally as thick as a sheet or 2 of printer paper. Gel coat, on the other hand, by the time it's all sanded and buffed out, you're probably going to be looking at roughly about a 1/16 of an inch in thickness. Quite a bit more than you're going to have with paint. And also because gel coat is also a polyester-based material, it's going to shrink and cure at the same rate as this polyester-based fairing compound. So there really is no issues as far as having that area become more noticeable down the road. It just doesn't happen. But if you're going to be doing this with paint and you're using polyester fairing compound, just kind of go into it knowing that you're going to want to do your initial sanding, give it a week or 2 at least. Come back, do another final sanding before you start switching gears and getting into your priming and then finishing up with the paint. So going forward now for the rest of this video, let's just kind of work under the presumption that since we're going to be using the polyester-based fairing compound, we're talking about finishing off that repair using gel coat and not paint. Now, when you're working with this polyester material, there are some things that you can do to make sure that you end up getting the results that you're looking for. And the first one is this polyester fairing compound generally likes to be catalyzed a little on the hot side. And by that I mean pushing it upwards of 2% catalyzation, maybe even 2.5. I wouldn't go any more than that. But it likes to be mixed a little bit hot. And tip number 2 is whenever you're talking about polyester material, whether it's fairing compound or resin that you're going to be wetting out fiberglass with, polyester-based material needs to have a certain film thickness in order for it to cure. So for example, if you were to spread out a paper thin layer of fairing compound, it's probably going to be a little bit gummy the next day or following days when you try and sand it, or at least give it some type of a solvent wash. And I've done a little demo on that. I'll see if I can find a way to insert that here. So when you're spreading this material out, you want to be a little heavy-handed and lay it on a little thicker than what you truly need. And then that way you'll be ensured that you're going to get a full cure, and then you can sand it back nice and clean, easy peasy. Now, what do I mean by thickness? I'm not sure how this equates to metric, but let's just say if you can spread this out to, say, a 1/16 of an inch in thickness minimum, I wouldn't go any more than a 1/4 inch ever with any kind of compound, whether it's epoxy or polyester. Doesn't matter. If you got to take up that much room, you're better off just laying up some more glass. But at a bare minimum, I'd say when you're laying out the polyester-based material, shoot for a thickness of at least a 1/16 of an inch in thickness. Give it an overnight cure, and it should sand absolutely perfect. Now, when we get to the sanding, this is a common issue that folks run into, and there's a very, very easy workaround, again, but you need to have an understanding of what's going on with this material after it's been applied. So this particular poly fairing, it already has wax mixed into it. And the long and short of it, polyester-based material will not cure if it is exposed to air. So you need to create some type of an air barrier over that, whether you're using PVA, wax. There is quite a few options, right? But the long and short of it, when you're spraying this material out, that wax that's mixed in with this fairing, it floats up to the surface, creates your air barrier so that everything can fully cure. Now, rhetorical question, what do you think is going to happen if you just go straight into sanding this material that has a wax layer over top? And again, this is where most people kind of start pulling their hair out a little bit. You're going to gum up your paper real quick. But there is a super, super simple workaround for that. And that is just going to be, you just got to remove the wax. And the easiest way to do that is to use a de-waxer, surface cleaner, something. Yep. This stuff. If it doesn't say de-waxer on it, it's not going to remove that wax layer. Acetone will not work. Lacquer thinner, I don't think will work. But you want to use a solvent that specifically says it is a de-waxer. I don't even think a degreaser is the same thing. But make sure it says de-waxer. Give it a quick wipe down. Let that solvent evaporate. Give it 5-10 minutes. And at that point, then you should be able to do your sanding. Dust, clean dust, no gum, right? Well, let me show you. So when I laid up these samples last night, I labeled them. So this is going to be the one that I am not going to be removing the wax on. Whereas, obviously, this one is. All right, so I'm not touching this one, I'm doing this one. And I'm going to give this one initially just a quick little wipe down, fold the rag, give it another wipe down, and just kind of repeat this process 2, 3, maybe even 4 times. But some things to notice here. Because we had enough thickness on here when I laid this up, there is nothing coming up on the rag. So this material has cured. Again, it's not going to be fully cured, that takes several weeks, but it's cured to the point where nothing is coming up on this rag, which is exactly what you want to see. And then I'm going to give this 5-10 minutes for the solvent to evaporate, and then we're going to give her a quick sand. So I'm not quite sure how well the camera is able to pick this up. Ideally, if I were able to hit this with an actual electric sander, something where you can generate some heat, the clogging is much, much more pronounced. You know, you'd clog up your, say a sanding disc in like 5-10 seconds until that wax is removed. But you'll go through quite a few sheets of sandpaper. But at least on this one, doing it by hand, again, I don't know how noticeable this is actually going to be, but there is starting to get some balling just on the top of this sandpaper. Now this was what I sanded that had not been de-waxed, whereas the material that has been de-waxed, it's perfectly clean. Come on. Perfectly clean. I think I gotta hide my face. So it does make a big difference. If you're gonna be doing the sanding, using an electric sander, again, where you're gonna be a little bit more aggressive, generating some heat, the difference between waxed versus non-waxed makes a night and day difference. And this is kind of where a lot of people tend to get pinched. They skip that step. And again, it takes 30 seconds, but they skip that step and then they wonder why they're blowing through so much sandpaper. Well, give it a quick wipe down, de-wax it, and you'll be golden. So some things that you can do to help make sure that you get the results you're looking for when you're working with polyester. Number one, make sure that the temperatures that you're in are 60 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer. Now that 60 is an absolute bare minimum. I have done some videos on how you can kind of cheat that a little bit, and I will include a link for that video down below in the description. Number two, this material, specifically with this fairing compound, this likes to be mixed a little on the hot side. So shoot for that 2%, maybe 2.5%. Now, if you're going to be doing small batches, let's just say you're going to be doing like little golf ball, 1 ounce size batches, figure about 16 to 18 drops per roughly ounce of fairing compound. This stuff, it's not, real strict chemistry. You can kind of eyeball it a little bit, but it's better to be a little bit on the hot side than a little bit closer to that 1%. 1%, it may or may not actually do its thing overnight. Over time it will, but if you're looking for that, finish it in the evening, come back the next day and you're able to start working on it some more, stick to closer to that 2, maybe even 2.5%. Number three, make sure that you have an adequate film thickness. If the material is rolled out too thin or is spread out too thin, it's not going to cure. And again, we're looking for a thickness of more than what you need. Try and shoot for roughly 1/16 of an inch in thickness. I'll try to include what the metric version of that is somewhere up on the screen here. And number four, after you've had an overnight cure, before you start doing any sanding with it, make sure you go ahead and remove that wax coat that had flowed to the surface. Use a good surface cleaner de-waxer. Let that solvent evaporate, and you should be all set. And on that note, I'm going to wrap this video up. So as always, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found this helpful. And if you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Thank you in advance. I appreciate it very much. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave those down below. I will do my best to follow up with you. And as always, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you in the next video.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.